I wasn't looking for Tartaria when I found the camps. I was researching American utopian communities, those strange social experiments that dotted the countryside between 1840 and 1920. Brook Farm, Oneida, New Harmony, the Shakers, the Harmonists, the Fourierists. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, communities that sprang up seemingly overnight, attracted hundreds or thousands of members, operated under bizarre social contracts, and then disappeared. Gone. Most of them. Just gone. The official history is straightforward. Idealistic reformers, inspired by European socialist thought, attempted to create perfect societies. They failed. Economic pressures, internal disputes, leadership problems, the usual explanations. Case closed. But the deeper I looked, the less sense it made. Not the existence of these communities, that's well documented, but the timing, the coordination, the specific things they were trying to hide. And that's where Tartaria becomes impossible to ignore. Let me show you what I found. Between 1840 and 1900, over 130 documented utopian communities were established in North America. But here's what struck me first: the clustering. They didn't appear randomly across time, they appeared in waves, concentrated bursts. 1840 to 1850, 27 communities founded. 1890 to 1900, 34 more. And the locations, not random, not scattered. They clustered around specific regions: upstate New York, the Ohio River Valley, Southern California, the exact regions where Tartarian architectural anomalies are most prevalent. Coincidence? Maybe. But then I started mapping them, literally plotting their locations against known examples of massive, ornate 19th century architecture, the kind conspiracy theorists associate with Tartaria, the buildings with no documented construction period, the structures that appeared in undeveloped frontier towns fully formed, with craftsmanship that supposedly required industrial infrastructure that didn't exist there yet. The overlap was unsettling. Within 50 miles of nearly every major utopian community, you find at least one unexplained structure, sometimes several. Grand hotels in towns of 300 people, massive exhibition halls in newly settled territories, courthouses with Baroque details that required master craftsmen who left no other trace of their existence. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Here's where the official explanation collapses. These communities weren't isolated experiments. They were organized, coordinated, connected through networks that shouldn't have existed. Let me explain. In 1843, a man named Adam Ballou founded the Hopedale community in Massachusetts. The same year, the exact same year, John Humphrey Noyes established the Putney community in Vermont. Within months, the Wisconsin Phalanx formed in Ceresco, and the Sylvania Association began in Pennsylvania. 4 separate communities, different founders, different stated philosophies, all launched within months of each other. The official story: independent actors inspired by the same zeitgeist, coincidentally acting simultaneously. But look closer. They shared members. Documentation shows individuals moving between communities with suspicious frequency. Not defecting from one to join another, that would make sense. No, maintaining membership in multiple communities simultaneously, traveling circuits, as if checking in, as if reporting back. And here's the strangest part: they shared architectural plans. The buildings themselves, the communal halls, the dormitories, the workshops, show remarkable similarity across supposedly independent communities separated by hundreds of miles. Same proportions, same decorative elements, sometimes identical floor plans. In 1850, communication across such distances was slow, expensive, difficult. Yet somehow these isolated experiments were building identical structures, recruiting from the same pools and coordinating their foundings within impossibly narrow time frames. This raises a simple but critical question. Who was coordinating them? Now let me tell you about the witnesses. Every major utopian community accepted what they called refugees, people with no clear origin story. individuals or families who arrived claiming to flee religious persecution, economic hardship, or unspecified troubles back east. But the documentation is strange. Take the Amana colonies in Iowa, founded 1855. They accepted 1,200 members in their first decade. The official records list names, but not origins, not previous residences, not family histories beyond one generation. Why not? These communities kept meticulous records otherwise. They documented every bushel of wheat, every yard of cloth, every dollar spent and earned. But ask where someone came from before joining. The records go silent. The deeper I went, the more I found this pattern. Communities that tracked everything except the previous lives of their members. Not suspicious absences, deliberate ones. The Oneida community in New York maintained detailed genealogical records. But only after members joined. Before that, nothing. As if their members materialized from nowhere with no past worth recording. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. These weren't communities of idealists fleeing mainstream society. These were communities designed to hide people, to erase their previous identities, to give them new narratives. But who were they hiding? And from what? Here's where we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Tartaria, or whatever we want to call that architectural and cultural mystery, supposedly vanished around 1800 to 1850, depending on which timeline you follow. A civilization erased, its buildings relabeled, its history rewritten. But if Tartaria existed, and if it was destroyed or absorbed around the mid-19th century, what happened to the people who remembered it? Not the rulers, not the elites, but the ordinary people who lived in those cities, who built those buildings, who possessed the knowledge of those construction techniques. You can't erase a civilization without witnesses, unless you hide them. The timing is impossible to ignore. The first wave of utopian communities, 1840 to 1850, corresponds exactly with the supposed final erasure of Tartarian presence in North America. As if someone needed places to put people, quickly, in bulk, and not just to hide them, to silence them. Let me show you something specific. The Shaker communities, perhaps the most famous of these utopian experiments, built structures that perplex architectural historians. Clean lines, perfect proportions, construction techniques that produce buildings still standing today 200 years later without major repairs. The official explanation, divine inspiration and careful craftsmanship. But the Shakers recruited from mainstream society, farmers, merchants, ordinary people, not master architects, not trained engineers. Yet their buildings demonstrate knowledge of structural principles that weren't codified in American architectural education until decades later. Load distribution, thermal efficiency, acoustic design. They built round barns, complex structures requiring precise mathematics, before such designs appeared in any American pattern book. How? The standard answer: trial and error, folk wisdom, lucky intuition. But here's what troubles me. They built these complex structures immediately. No progression from simple to complex, no learning curve. The first Shaker barn is as sophisticated as the last, as if they knew how. As if they'd done it before. The evidence suggests something much larger than religious inspiration. Then there's the linguistic anomaly. Several utopian communities developed their own languages or dialects. The Harmony Society, the Zohar separatists, even some Shaker communities employed unusual terminology. The official explanation: religious differentiation, creating sacred vocabulary, building group identity. But I found records, rare ones fragmentary, of investigators and journalists visiting these communities in the 1860s and 1870s. Their accounts mention hearing elderly members speaking among themselves in languages they couldn't identify. Not German, not any Native American tongue, not any known European language. One 1872 account from a journalist visiting the Amana colonies describes hearing two elderly women conversing in a flowing melodic tongue, unlike any I have encountered in my travels, which span 4 continents. When asked, they claimed it was Old German, but the journalist had German, spoke it fluently, and noted it bore no resemblance. The conversation ended. The women went silent. The journalist was politely asked to leave. The pattern repeats. Strange languages quickly silenced when outsiders approach. Elderly members, the last speakers, dying without teaching anyone. Knowledge evaporating, not lost, deliberately untransmitted. And here's where it gets truly strange. These communities didn't gradually decline. They ended abruptly. Between 1890 and 1920, over 90% of utopian communities dissolved. Not slowly, not through decades of dwindling membership. They closed down within years, sometimes months. The official explanations vary: economic pressures, leadership deaths, loss of commitment to communal ideals. But look at the details. The Harmony Society, thriving economically, wealthy beyond measure, with successful industries and thousands of acres, dissolved in 1905. Just ended, divided their assets, and disbanded. Why? The Zor separatists, established 1817, survived through the Civil War, through economic depressions, through leadership transitions. Then in 1898 they voted to dissolve. 80 years of communal life ended by vote. No crisis precipitated it, no disaster, just a decision. And the strangest part? The silence that followed. You can find abundant documentation about these communities' founding, their operations, their daily lives, but their endings, minimal records, few interviews with former members, almost no first-hand accounts of why they disbanded. The participants went silent. They returned to mainstream society and never spoke of it again. Let me give you specifics about what vanished. The Oneida community manufactured animal traps and silverware, using metallurgical techniques that puzzled competitors. Their steel held an edge longer, their silver resist tarnish better, their manufacturing processes produced less waste. When the community dissolved in 1880, they transitioned to a joint stock company. The products continued, but the techniques simplified, the quality declined, the mysterious efficiency disappeared, as if the people who knew the superior methods left, or stopped sharing. The same pattern appears in the shaker furniture tradition. Early shaker pieces, made when the original generation was still alive, demonstrate joinery techniques that modern craftspeople struggle to replicate. Joints that require no glue, no nails, yet remain solid for 2 centuries. Later pieces, made after the original craftspeople died, still well made, but simpler. The advanced knowledge gone. The Amana woolen mills produced cloth that exceeded anything else manufactured in America in the 1860s to 1880s. Thread counts that shouldn't have been possible with their equipment. Dyes that didn't fade. Waterproofing without chemical treatment. When Amana transitioned to a corporate model in 1932, the textile quality immediately declined. The old workers retired or died. The knowledge vanished, not gradually lost, suddenly absent. Now let me show you the impossible part. In 1890 to 1905, during that wave of sudden dissolution, something strange happened. Multiple communities separated by hundreds or thousands of miles, with no documented communication between them, ended within months of each other. 1898, Zoar separatists dissolve. 1899, the altruist community disbands. 1900, the Ruskin Cooperative closes. 1902, Helicon Home Colony ends. 1905, the Harmony Society dissolves. 5 communities, 5 different states, all ending within 7 years. Why? The official answer: coincidence, the general decline of communitarian enthusiasm, economic modernization making such communities obsolete. But here's what troubles me. They weren't struggling. The Harmony Society was wealthy. Zoar was stable. These weren't failing experiments limping to an end. They were thriving operations that abruptly shut down, as if they'd fulfilled their purpose, as if they'd completed their mission, as if the witnesses they'd been hiding had finally died. And what remains? In former Utopian community sites across America, you find the strangest architectural survivors. Not the communal housing, that's often gone. Not the workshops or farms, but the ceremonial buildings, the meeting halls, the religious structures. Buildings that demonstrate construction knowledge exceeding what the communities should have possessed. Buildings with acoustic properties that allow whispers to carry across impossible distances. With thermal regulation that defies the available technology. With symbolic decorations that match no known tradition. The Shaker Meeting House in Canterbury, New Hampshire. Perfect acoustics without modern sound engineering. Built by farmers with no architectural training. The Harmony Society's church in Economy, Pennsylvania. Astronomical alignments built into its foundation. Precise to degrees that required surveying equipment the community didn't own. The Amana community's meeting houses. Timber framing using techniques that don't appear in any American carpentry manual before 1900. They're still standing. Silent testimonies to knowledge that shouldn't have existed. The deeper I looked, the more I found these anomalies, these impossibilities. Let me tell you about the elderly. Every account of these communities from the late 19th century mentions the reverence shown to the oldest members. Not unusual. Many cultures honor elders, but the specificity is striking. In the Amana colonies, the oldest members were called witnesses, literally. Not metaphorically, not as a religious title, but as their official designation in community records. Witnesses to what? The Shakers accorded their eldest members, particularly those over 70, special privileges, private rooms, exemption from work, dedicated caretakers, as if preserving them was essential. And here's what's haunting. In multiple communities, rules explicitly prohibited recording the life stories of the oldest members, the exact opposite of what you'd expect. You'd think they'd want to preserve the memories of their founders. But no, silence was mandated. The Harmony Society maintained a rule. No member's history before joining could be discussed. Violation meant expulsion. Why? What were they protecting? Or what were they preventing from being remembered? By 1920, it was over. The communities were gone, the witnesses were dead, the buildings remained, but the knowledge didn't. And America forgot. Deliberately. I can't prove that, but the speed and thoroughness of the forgetting is remarkable. These communities had involved thousands of people. Members, visitors, trading partners, neighbours, yet within one generation they became historical footnotes, curiosities, quaint failed experiments, the architectural anomalies attributed to folk wisdom, the linguistic mysteries, never investigated, the coordination, never questioned, the sudden endings, never explained, the official history just moved on. And here's what keeps me awake. It worked. Ask anyone about 19th century American history, and they'll mention westward expansion, industrialization, the Civil War. Ask about utopian communities and you get blank stares. Maybe someone remembers the Shakers made furniture, but the scale, the coordination, the architectural mysteries, the strange languages, the impossible techniques, gone, erased, not from the records, those still exist, buried in archives, but from collective memory, as if someone wanted these questions unasked. So let me ask the question directly. Were these communities hiding Tartaria's last witnesses? Were they refuge camps for people who remembered a different history? Who possessed knowledge that had to be suppressed? Who spoke languages that needed to die? The official explanation, idealistic social experiments, doesn't account for the patterns. It doesn't explain the coordination, the architectural impossibilities, the deliberate silence about origins, the sudden endings. But if these communities were designed to isolate and gradually eliminate the last people who remembered Tartaria, who could build like Tartaria, who spoke Tartaria's languages, who knew Tartaria's techniques, then everything makes sense. The timing, right after Tartaria's supposed erasure. The locations clustered around Tartarian architectural sites, the secrecy about origins hiding people's true identities. The architectural knowledge, remnant skills from a lost civilization, the languages, Tartarian tongues dying with their last speakers, the sudden endings, missions completed, witnesses gone, and the alternative? That doesn't make sense either. Maybe these communities were trying to rebuild Tartaria, not hide it, but resurrect it. Secret societies attempting to preserve and transmit forbidden knowledge, using the cover of religious communes to practice ancient techniques, to teach lost skills, to keep the flame alive. But they failed, or were stopped, or chose to dissolve rather than be discovered. Either way, hiding witnesses or attempting restoration, the evidence suggests these communities knew something. Something we've forgotten, something we were made to forget. And that's what haunts me most, not what the evidence shows, but what it doesn't. The absence of transition narratives, the missing documentation of endings, the collective silence of thousands of former members. When these communities dissolved, their members returned to ordinary American life. Farmers, merchants, workers, they didn't write memoirs, didn't give interviews, didn't preserve their unique experiences. Thousands of people who'd lived radical alternative lifestyles for decades just went silent. The silence was deafening. And it was universal. Across communities, across decades, across geographic regions, nobody talked. That's not human nature. People tell stories, especially about transformative experiences. Yet these thousands of individuals all independently chose silence, or were compelled to it. So what knowledge died with them? The construction techniques that produced buildings still standing strong after 2 centuries, the metallurgical processes that made superior steel, the textile methods that created fade-proof dyes, the acoustic engineering built by farmers, the languages spoken by grandmothers, all of it, gone. Not lost gradually, not fading over generations, terminated, cut off. And we're told this was natural, inevitable, the normal progression of history. But the evidence suggests something much larger. I started looking for utopian communities and found witness camps. I started researching social experiments and found an orchestrated silence. I started tracing architectural anomalies and found deliberate amnesia. The official history says idealists tried to build perfect societies and failed. But the evidence asks, what if they were never about building the future? What if they were about burying the past? What if those communities weren't utopian experiments at all, but witness protection programs, holding facilities for people who knew too much, or ark ships for a dying civilization, making one last attempt to preserve what was being erased? Were they hiding Tartaria's last witnesses, or trying to resurrect Tartaria itself? I don't have the answer. The documentation that would prove it is missing, suspiciously, conveniently missing. The people who knew are dead. The communities are dissolved, but the buildings remain. Those impossible buildings scattered across America, whispering secrets in their perfect proportions and mysterious techniques. And once you see the pattern, the timing, the coordination, the silence, you can't unsee it. Maybe we're living in the world that those communities were trying to prevent, or the world they gave up trying to rebuild. Either way, something vast was lost, and somebody wanted it that way. The question isn't whether these communities were connected to Tartaria. The question is, what did they know that required such elaborate erasure? And who benefits from us not asking?